Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. The final mini-set of this Hearthstone Standard year is approaching. Hearthstone Standard year always extends a little bit over the calendar year, so in April there's going to be a standard rotation. 3 sets are going to leave: Forged in the Barrens, United in Stormwind, Fractured in Alterac Valley, but one more batch of cards is coming for this standard year. So what to expect from the miniset? What are some of my hopes? What do I expect Blizzard to do with the miniset? Let's talk about that a little. First of all, the miniset typically supports some of the themes explored in the main set, and the keyword from the main set, so Mana Thirst, should be appearing in this miniset. In the final miniset of the year, Blizzard often also pays some homage to some of the themes that were introduced earlier in the year. So locations, colossals. We could expect a location or colossal. Some people are expecting like a Death Knight location and a Death Knight colossal, and that could very well happen. And also, sometimes we also get something like one last hurrah for something that is rotating out, so they want to give it one more moment to shine. Although that usually happens with the last expansion and not only in the miniset, but miniset is also a possible place for that. So something like that could happen, but what does that mean class by class? Well, for Death Knight, March of the Lich King, that set is a Blood Rune set for Death Knight. Have you paid attention to how Death Knight cards are distributed? Because all the triple Blood Rune cards are in March of the Lich King, all the triple Frost Rune cards are in Path of Arthas, and all the triple Unholy Rune cards are in the core set. So Blizzard has talked earlier about how they support Death Knight class, and they have said that they can't really support adequately all runes in all expansions. So they're going to mainly focus on some rune in each expansion and then give some token support for others. So this is the Blood Rune set. What will happen in the mini set? I don't expect a 4th triple blood card, because there's no triple card for any of the other runes. That would be a bit of a surprise. What I would love to see would be some cards that would support running multiple rune types, because right now, I mean, the triple rune cards are just so strong. If you play blood, you play blood, or unholy, or frost. They're just, those cards are so invaluable to the archetypes that they just cannot be easily replaced. I know there is a Rainbow Death Knight, which is not doing too well, but it shows some hope sometimes. There's like Blood Unholy Hand buff decks that, well, they're actually pretty bad. Blood Frost is something that is really unexplored. So I would hope that the miniset would give some kind of support, so that there would be some reason to play combinations of runes. Because before Death Knight came, the developers were talking about, okay, maybe like the Rainbow Death Knight, the 1/1/1 rune doesn't really work, but all the combinations of 2+1 rune should feature playable decks, which they kind of don't. So they haven't been able to fulfill that design plan that they had. So maybe we can get some kind of support for those for Death Knight. As for Demon Hunter, well, they nerfed the quest, but the spell archetype is doing well. Soul Eater Skite has been a major success. It is a strong card, it's a pretty interesting card, it's a fun card to play with. It doesn't feel too overpowering to play against, so overall Soul Eater Skite is one of the best successes from March of the Lich King. On the other hand, I'm not sure, I mean, they could further support the spell archetype, but the archetype is doing so well that can they really? Or is it just going to be too strong? Whereas some other teams like those Outcast cards and Aggro are not doing quite as well, and those would really deserve more support. Especially if they try to make that Outcast thing. I mean, potentially Outcast could be a thing, but they have tried it multiple times and there's just never enough good Outcast cards to make Outcast Demon Hunter team of Outcasts just work in Demon Hunter that well. But maybe in the miniset they will give something for that one. Then there is Druid, and Druid is in a lot of trouble right now. Ramp Druid is not doing well, Aggro Druid is not doing too well. Aggro Druid, there's just so many Aggro decks out there, and they're a little bit faster than Aggro Druid even, so Aggro Druid is struggling. And especially the new support they gave was for Undead Aggro Druid, and that's not even a thing. I mean, the regular Aggro Druid, I mean, the regular version uses Lingering Zombie, but other than that, it just doesn't use the Undead synergies at all. It's still a nature deck. So undead aggro support is pretty high on my wish list and on my predictions list for Druid. And then, how do you support Ramp Druid? You can't really print more ramp cards right now, not until Guff rotates out, so that would only be in the first expansion of the new year. There's this armor team, so maybe something with armor, so that the current Ramp Druid has some more armor cards that it can play around with. That would be my guess. Hunter is another class that is still doing well, and Shockspitter was introduced in the March of the Lich King expansion, and Shockspitter from 2 mana to 4 mana is still good. That just boggles the mind. What else was in March of the Lich King for Hunter? Where there was a bunch of arcane stuff, but that arcane Hunter hasn't really done anything, so maybe another arcane spell. Arcane spell is a little bit scary, because we still have the potential for Quest Hunter. Quest Hunter isn't really in the meta at the moment, but there's no reason Quest Hunter couldn't become part of the meta if there's some good Hunter spells that can go into that. So I think they will print some kind of arcane support. Whether that's also going to support Quest Hunter, we'll see. And then Phase Hunter. Phase Hunter is kind of... it's somewhat playable, but I mean, it could use something like a 2-drop, for example, maybe a 1-drop. There's some Phase Hunter minions that could definitely be printed, and that could give that archetype a boost. As for Mage, Mage is also doing well in the current meta. Big Spell Mage is really good, but that's going to rotate, almost the entire deck is going to rotate out soon. Also, there's like no need to give Big Spell Mage a last hurrah, because it already has that last hurrah right now. It just doesn't even use any new cards for that. Then there's Aggro Mage. Aggro Mage is also doing well, and it's a little scary to print more Arcane Bolt support, because Aggro Mage is already doing so well. So that doesn't leave many recent Mage archetypes to support. I mean, Casino Mage, they already tried to buff Casino Mage. They gave some buffs to those Casino cards, random cards. I would hate to see that, but like, what else are they going to do for Mage? The March of the Lich King expansion mainly provided support for 2 types of paladins. There's this aggressive pure paladin, which is pretty good. But what it could really use, the card slot that keeps changing in the deck, is the 2-drop slot. If pure paladin had a strong 2-mana card, I mean, that would really fit well into the deck. And then there was a bunch of support for Dragon Paladin. But Dragon Paladin, you still kind of have to build it this one way, and there's just lack of options, lack of opportunities. But can you even print so many dragons that you could actually build a Dragon Paladin? I just don't know. Priest is a class that has been struggling as of late. Sure, Undead Priest sometimes shows some promise. Svalna Priest, it kind of comes and goes, but neither has been able to really maintain a position in the meta. We don't know yet how it's going to happen after the latest balance patch. Undead Priest, there's like 3 types of Undead Priests at the moment. There's the pure aggro variant, then there is the 3-drops variant, and then there is the latest one, is one that uses the 2-mana 5/5, and also the spell that can silence that. But I don't know. Maybe the 2-mana 5/5 thing somehow solves some Undead Priest problems, or maybe not. So it's a little early still to say what will happen with Undead Priest, but if you want the Undead Priest to be like a pure aggro deck, then and not play too much around with the resurrections, then it would need a strong early game. I mean, this is a fairly recurring theme, as you can see. Undead early game, Undead early game. Yeah, that's what the game could use if you want Undead to be a viable tribe. Rogue is always a little bit tricky one, because Rogue, like, it tends to go like, hey, Rogue is not that great, except that boom, suddenly it just kills everybody. And especially Rogue typically is one of the higher skill decks in the game, so it performs better at higher ranks, so you have to be a little bit careful about that. Concoctions are already very strong. Now that Rogue lost access to the Null, that means that the Concoctions deck is also weaker because it gets beaten by aggro, but if you give it a concoction that can just beat aggro, then, well, you know, what would you play other than Rogue after that? So it's really tricky to try to buff concoctions, because concoctions are the strongest part of the deck. Then another team that gained support in March of the Lich King was Death Rattle Rogue, and Death Rattle Rogue was already nerfed and the deck was pretty much killed. Will it get another chance? Is there going to be some kind of cards that will make Death Rattle Rogue come back in a more balanced form? that could be an idea for Rogue. As for Shaman and Ladder, once again, Shaman has devolved into an Evolve Shaman. It's just Evolve Shaman, Evolve Shaman, Evolve Shaman. And it's kind of boring right now, because there's not much that you can tinker with the deck. It's just, that's the deck, and boom. What about other Shaman archetypes? Undead Aggro. Hey, Undead Aggro and early game. Yeah, I think I've heard that before. But Undead Aggro Shaman also doesn't have an early game. Then there's Big Shaman. Big Shaman got support in March of the Lich King. What would Big Shaman need to be viable? At least it would need some new Death Rattle minions, big Death Rattle minions that it can play and summon. And also some people are playing with Murloc Shaman. Murloc Shaman, the key cards, Flurgle is rotating out in April, so Murloc Shaman is going to be gone, most likely. Maybe they want Murloc Shaman to have a good farewell. Maybe they will print some support card for it. That could be possible. Warlock is a curious one, because Warlock is seeing play in the meta. There's Imp Warlock, there's Curse Imp Warlock, there's Phylactery Warlock, and the Phylactery Warlock does use some of the new cards, like Devourer of Souls, for example, and it uses the card draw. So there's a couple of cards Phylactery Warlock uses, but all the other stuff, all those undead synergies, all the discard synergies that were printed in March of the Lich King, there's just no use for them. They were even buffed in the patch, but they're still totally useless. So how do they promote these Warlock archetypes? I mean, I actually hope that they won't try with discard again, because discard, they've tried that so many times. And they know they can make it work if they print strong enough cards like, hey, Malakazar Simp back in the day. But I really hope they won't do more discard stuff, but I'm afraid they will, because they seem to love that. And then the undead synergies, those cards are just pretty bad. So how do you build an undead deck? I mean, Dark Dratir that's like the only reasonable card there, but none of the rest of the stuff does anything. So there's a lot of work if you want to put undead into Warlock. And finally there is Warrior, and Warrior is another curious case where Enrage Warrior is a fine deck. And there's a couple of versions of Enrage Warrior. There's a version that uses some of the new cards, some of those fire spells. Then there's a version that doesn't use any cards from March of the Lich King. And those two approaches are roughly even. So, yeah. But not about that. Maybe they could support it more, because the new package, the fire package, what if there's more fire cards? Maybe more fire cards could push the package also into new directions outside of just Enrage. And another thing, they buffed Last Stand in the patch, so they tried to give Taunt Warrior a bit more of tools, but it just doesn't have many tools. So maybe some kind of taunt support, some big Warrior taunt minion or something that Warrior could work with. Warrior could really use a win condition for the Control Warrior. Like, they were trying to buff some old win conditions like Nelly, but what about giving us a brand new win condition? I mean, Kazaku-san was a card that came in a mini set, so we do have precedent for getting win conditions in a mini set. Maybe Warrior win condition could be something that could arrive. So everyone is expecting the mini set any time. Historically looking, it should arrive within the next 2 weeks. We should get announcement either next week or at the very latest the week after. And yeah, it's not far from the mini set, and I hope we'll get some interesting cards. I mean, a Death Knight Location, a Death Knight Colossal could be intriguing, and some of the archetypes from March of the Lich King that just aren't shining could potentially be rescued, and some others like Discard Warlock are hopefully going to be forgotten. And I really hope we don't get more concoctions, because they could just totally dominate the meta. Lots of hopes, lots of fears. A little bit more waiting, and we'll get the final mini set of the standard year. Thank you for watching. Click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and a special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, YouTube members and Twitch subscribers who make all of these videos possible.